Out here in this weather, raining, cold, you probably think I've got rocks in my head. No. On this episode of 4x4 Australia's How to Off-Road Driving series, we're going to talk about, you guessed it, rocks. And what are we talking about rocks for? We're talking about sandstone like this, we're talking about limestone, shale. One thing in common, it's all hard and it's all hard on the gear, and that gear is your four-wheel drive. So some of the things you want to think about before driving on rocks is making sure your 4x4 is up to the job. And that means a vehicle with plenty of ground clearance, a vehicle with the right tyres, a vehicle with underbody protection, all those sorts of things that are going to enable you to drive over terrain like this without any damage. So let's start with tyres. We always start with tyres, and there's a reason for that. When driving on rocks, it's not the tread pattern that's so important, it's the tyre pressures and it's the tyre construction. So why would you lower your tyre pressures for driving on rocks? Well, it allows the tyre to conform to the different surfaces as you drive over it, and that gives you more traction. And also, if your tyre's too hard up at road pressures, it's not going to conform, and that can mean that those different surfaces and jagged edges can cause damage to the tyre. So you must lower your tyre pressures for driving on rocks. Now, it'll depend on your vehicle, your tyre type, to what pressures you go down to, but I'd recommend somewhere around the 22 to 28 range if you're running 35 on the road. So when you buy your four-wheel drive new from the dealer, it's going to come probably with passenger construction tyres, and they're quite light and really good on the road. But when you're driving on rocks and you've got lots of jagged edges and poking out rocks here and there, that's when you need a tougher tyre. You need a light truck construction tyre. And you'll see that marked on the tyre's sidewall. There's more plies in the sidewall, and that protects the tyre from damage when you're driving on rocks. So the next thing we want to talk about is under vehicle protection. As you can see with this Land Cruiser, it's got heaps of ground clearance. So, you know, it might not be as important as on a vehicle with less ground clearance, but this vehicle still has plenty of under vehicle protection. It's got a bash plate at the front, it's got bash plates under the transfer case and areas like that, steel side steps. So these things are all very important as you're climbing over rocks and stuff and your vehicle touches the ground. You don't want to cause any damage to those under vehicle components, so that's why you need protection. Particularly on vehicles that have less ground clearance than this or might have an independent front suspension, you need really good under vehicle protection. Just a 2-inch lift or a 50mm lift and a bit of a lift from an increased tyre size, that will give you a lot more ground clearance and enable you to get over more difficult terrain like this that we have in front of us here. You also want to think about traction aids. A lot of modern utes these days will come standard with a rear diff lock and electronic traction control. The traction control on some vehicles will turn off if you engage that rear diff lock, which will not necessarily give you the ability to get over an obstacle like this. So you've got a couple of alternatives. You can fit an aftermarket front diff lock, and that way you can have front and rear lockers and you can get over just about anything, or you can bring a mate along and have them pack the trail with rocks like this. So let's talk about driving technique. When you get to rocks, you don't want to barrel up stuff at high speed. Rocks are hard, they cause damage to your vehicle if you ground it. So the trick to rock driving is to choose your line carefully and then drive it in low range at a low speed, as slow as you possibly can. It's also a good idea to have a spotter, someone outside the vehicle who can guide you so you're not going to damage your vehicle. If that spotter has a UHF and you got one in your car as well, that's going to make it even easier. But make sure you understand each other's directions, you know, whether it's steering angle or, you know, stop or whatever. Make sure you have a conversation before you go up something so you know what you're talking about. Make sure you've got a kinetic recovery rope or a snatch strap and shackles and all that kind of equipment. If you're driving solo, you really need a winch. Recovery tracks are also a good idea. Not only can they be used in soft sand, but they can also be used for track building and that kind of stuff. You can see the red recovery point on this vehicle. That's a rated recovery point, and that's very different to the tie down point that comes standard on most vehicles. And I also want to point out that if you're using a snatch strap, you must have a rated recovery point of some kind at the back of your vehicle. Another piece of gear you should take with you when you're rock driving is a tyre repair kit, because these rocks are hard, there's jagged edges, there's all sorts of stuff. And if you damage a tyre, you're going to want to be able to fix it when you're out on the trails. So when you go four-wheel driving, no matter where you go, one day you're going to come across rocks like this. they've been here for a long time and they're going to be here after you've long gone. But if you can drive over things like this, you get to magnificent places and you'll have a great time. So that's it for rocks. I want to get some rocks under the wheels of this Land Cruiser because it looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. So I'll catch you next time. But make sure you keep an eye out for the next episode of 4x4 Australia's How to Off-Road Driving series.